If you're still awake, you know the feeling. That quiet stretch of the night when the house settles, and your own thoughts feel too loud. Welcome. I'm the one who collects the stories you'd never tell your friends, the ones that keep you staring at the ceiling. Some might be logical, others might not be. Tonight, we're not looking for answers, just the truth of what happened. There are no monsters here that we can point to or names to pin down. Just the raw, unfiltered accounts of things that defied explanation. Take a breath. Let's get into the first one. I've never told anyone this, not even my wife, but I need to say it out loud to make it real. This happened to me 3 years ago during my second week working the night shift at the St. Jude's ER triage desk. It was around 3:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, a time of the morning where the air feels thick and the fluorescent lights hum with a low, vibrating headache. I remember the smell of antiseptic mixed with stale coffee and the rhythmic beep of the heart monitors creating a metronome for the dead of night. I was alone in the triage bay, just the night nurse, Elena, in the back room, and me, trying to stay awake by staring at the clock on the wall. The hospital at that hour has a specific, hollowed-out feel, like a giant machine running on autopilot while the world outside sleeps. My routine was simple: process the admittees, direct the family members, and wait for the doctors to come collect the critical cases. About an hour in, I noticed the badge reader by the supply closet door was acting up. It beeped softly, the little green light flashing blue instead of its usual solid green, and it wouldn't register anyone's card no matter how many times I swiped it. I thought it was a glitch, maybe a power surge or a dirty sensor, so I just wiped it down with my sleeve and kept working. I told myself it was nothing, just old electronics failing, because the alternative was to start thinking about what it might mean to have a door that refused to acknowledge the living. It started with the footsteps. I'm talking about distinct, heavy boots on the linoleum, coming from the stairwell that leads to the morgue, which is 3 floors down. I knew they weren't coming up because the doors were locked, but the sound was right outside my window, like someone was pacing back and forth in the corridor, waiting for the door to open. I went to the door to check, thinking it was a janitor or maybe a drunk doctor on a break, but the hall was empty, just the long strip of darkness stretching out to the elevators. Then, the badge reader started beeping again, but this time it wasn't the soft beep, it was a loud, harsh screech that made my teeth ache. I tried to override it, to force the door open, but the keypad wouldn't respond, and the red light started pulsing like a heartbeat. I called out, my voice cracking, but the only answer was the static of the intercom system, which crackled with a voice that sounded like Elena, but slower, deeper, and repeating the word "open" over and over. I finally broke the glass on the badge reader to get the door open, thinking I could just run to the nurse's station for help, but the corridor was different. The lights were gone, replaced by a thick, gray fog that smelled like wet earth and copper. The footsteps were right behind me now, but I couldn't feel them on my back. I could feel them through the floor, a vibration that traveled up through the soles of my shoes. I saw the figure standing at the end of the hall, a tall, dark shape that seemed to absorb the light around it, but when I looked closer, I realized it wasn't a person. It had too many joints, too many limbs, and its face was a smooth, pale surface where my features should be. It wasn't attacking me, it was just standing there, watching me, and the door I had broken was slowly, painfully reassembling itself behind me, sealing me in the fog with it. I ran. I didn't think, I just ran, slamming my body against the elevator doors until they dinged and opened, and I dove into the box as it began to descend. I waited for it to stop at the lobby, but it kept going, plunging down into the basement levels, past the morgue, past the maintenance tunnels, until the lights flickered and died completely. When they came back on, I was standing in the triage bay, the badge reader fixed, the lights humming their usual hum, and Elena was asleep in the back room. Nothing had changed. But the next morning, the security footage from the stairwell showed nothing but static, and the badge reader log showed a single entry, my own ID card, swiped at 3:14 a.m., the exact minute before I heard the footsteps. I still work there, but I don't go to the night shift anymore, and I never go near that supply closet again. This happened to me 3 years ago, back when I was living in the basement apartment I'd rented from my aunt in the suburbs. It was a quiet, rainy Tuesday, around 1:30 in the morning, and the kind of stillness that makes the house sound like it's breathing. I had just gotten back from a late shift at the warehouse, the kind of work that leaves your brain running on autopilot. I remember locking the deadbolt, the sound of the heavy metal sliding into place echoing too loudly in the small entryway, and then flopping onto the lumpy couch to watch a rerun of an old sitcom. That was the last normal thing I did that night. For the first few weeks, the place felt perfectly fine, just a little cheap in the way older rental units tend to be. The floors creaked, and the radiator hissed every few minutes like a dying snake. I bought a small houseplant for the corner of the living room, a snake plant that seemed stubbornly alive no matter how much I ignored it. The only oddity I noticed, which I chalked up to the drafty windows, was that the potted soil seemed to shift slightly on its own. I'd come home from the store or just after work and find the dirt pushed up in a small mound right near the pot's rim, as if something had just dug its way out, only to realize it was nothing more than my imagination playing tricks in the dim yellow light. I told myself the house was settling, that the humidity made the soil expand, that maybe a mouse was burrowing in the corner. It was enough of a plausible explanation to keep me from moving out, even though the air in the room always felt a degree colder than the rest of the apartment. Then the small noises started. At first, they were just the faint sound of scratching behind the drywall, right above where I kept my books. I'd stop in the middle of the night, head cocked to the side, convinced it was just the wind rattling the loose siding outside. But it wasn't wind. The scratching got more deliberate, a rhythmic tap, tap, drag that sounded exactly like a fingernail being dragged across the wood. I started leaving my bedroom door cracked open, thinking it would help me hear if someone was actually in the hallway. The apartment felt smaller, the walls pressing in. One night, I woke up to the sound of the front door handle jiggling, the metal clicking against the lock. I froze, holding my breath, listening to the deadbolt rattle under the pressure. It stopped after a minute, but the doorknob was left slightly turned, as if someone had just leaned against it. I went out there with a baseball bat, sweating through my shirt, and found nothing. The knob was locked tight again. I told myself a ghost, a draft, a faulty lock. I told myself I was just paranoid. The situation escalated to the point where I couldn't sleep at all. I started sleeping on the floor in the living room, right next to the window, because the door felt too vulnerable. One morning, I woke up to find my snake plant lying on its side, the soil scattered across the rug in a perfect circle. I screamed, grabbing the plant and shaking it, thinking maybe it had been knocked over in the night. But there were no footprints on the dust-covered floor, except for a single, wet footprint in the mud of the pot. It was a human footprint, small and bare, leading from the plant directly to the corner of the room, where it just stopped. I called the police, but they found no signs of forced entry, no missing items, just a broken plant. They suggested I might have moved the plant in my sleep, or that I was suffering from severe sleep deprivation. They even suggested a mental health evaluation. I went home, terrified, and watched the front door from the couch, staring at the handle, waiting for something to happen. I knew, with a sinking feeling in my stomach, that whatever it was wasn't outside anymore. That night, I was sitting in the armchair, the TV playing static, when I felt a breath on the back of my neck. It wasn't a gust of air, it was warm, moist, and smelled distinctly of damp earth and rot. I spun around, swinging my fist, but the room was empty. The window was shut tight. I stumbled to the corner where the plant had fallen, and there, standing in the corner of the ceiling, was a man. He was crouched in an impossible position, his legs wrapped around the top of the drywall, his face pressed against the plaster, eyes wide and bloodshot, staring at me. He didn't move when I screamed. He just whispered my name, his voice sounding like it was coming from inside the walls, and then he sank into the plaster as if he were made of water, leaving a dark, wet stain that looked like a person-shaped void. I backed away, tripping over the rug, and the front door slammed shut on its own. I haven't slept there since. I packed up my things in the middle of the night and ran to a hotel, leaving the keys on the counter with a note that I was moving. I haven't been back, but I checked the apartment online every few days. The listing is still up, and the photos show the same room, same yellow light, same corner. But the last photo, taken 3 weeks after I left, shows the corner where I saw him. There's no one there, but the dark, wet stain on the ceiling has spread, covering the entire wall, and the shape of the man is clearer now, as if he's been there all along, just waiting for me to leave so he could start over again. I still check the door locks on my current place, just in case, but I can't shake the feeling that he's not in the basement anymore. He's just in the walls. This happened to me last October on a hiking trail near my parents' cabin in the Adirondacks. I was about 30 minutes from the trailhead, surrounded by a dense wall of pines that had started turning brown. The air was dead still, the kind of silence that makes your own footsteps sound like gunshots. I thought I'd just take a quick detour to check the old fishing spot upstream, but something about that path felt wrong before I even stepped off the main road. I never made it back to the car the way I came. It started as a normal Saturday afternoon. I'd packed a thermos of coffee and my favorite hiking boots, expecting a quiet hour of solitude. The trail was well worn, but the further I walked, the less I recognized it. The usual markers, the painted arrows on the trees and the milepost signs, seemed to have shifted or disappeared entirely. I chalked it up to the fog rolling in off the nearby lake, which had turned a strange, milky gray. I told myself it was just a case of poor orientation. I'd walked this trail a dozen times with my dad. But when I stopped to tie my shoe, I noticed the trees around me were all facing the same direction, like they were all looking at me. I brushed it off as a trick of the light, took a sip of cold coffee, and pushed forward, telling myself I was overthinking it. The air grew heavier, smelling faintly of wet earth and something sweet, like rotting fruit. My phone, which had full bars at the trailhead, suddenly dropped to 1 bar, then 0. I tried to take a photo of the path ahead to document the route, but when the camera app loaded, the screen was just a static, white snow. I laughed nervously, telling myself it was a glitch. A minute later, I heard a twig snap behind me. I spun around, but the path was empty. A moment after that, I felt a sudden drop in temperature, a chill that seeped through my jacket despite it being midday. I started walking faster, convinced I was just disoriented by the fog. Then, I saw a set of footprints in the mud ahead. They were mine, but they were facing backward, leading away from where I had just come from, yet clearly made by my own boots. I stopped, my heart hammering against my ribs, and told myself it was a trick of the mud, a trick of my tired eyes. I turned to run back the way I came, but the trail had vanished. The path I had walked on was now a solid wall of ferns and fallen logs, impenetrable and ancient. The silence wasn't just gone, it was suffocating. The birds had stopped singing minutes ago, and the wind had died. I saw a figure standing 50 yards up the hill, just beyond a cluster of pines. It was tall, impossibly thin, wearing clothes that looked like they were made of the same gray fog that had rolled in. It didn't move, just stood there with its head tilted at a sharp, unnatural angle. I tried to scream, but my throat felt filled with wet leaves. I ran, crashing through the underbrush, but every step I took felt like I was wading through deep water, the ground pulling at my ankles. The figure didn't chase me, it just turned and walked in the opposite direction, moving with a fluidity that defied the terrain, disappearing into the mist. I stumbled out of the tree line an hour later, or maybe 10 minutes, time didn't make sense. My boots were muddy, my phone was dead, but the worst part was the feeling of being watched from the trees I had just escaped. I drove home immediately, locked my car, and checked the back seat 3 times. I haven't been able to sleep properly since. Yesterday, I was cleaning my boots in the sink, trying to wash away the dirt, and I found a small, dried fern leaf tucked into the tread of my left boot. I don't remember picking it up. I don't remember walking through the ferns. I just found it there, perfectly preserved, as if it had been waiting for me to return to take it back. If something like this has ever happened to you, I need you to know you aren't alone. Please drop your story in the comments below. Sometimes, just reading them makes the silence feel a little less heavy. Before you go, check the next video, because the stories waiting there are even harder to explain. If you want more of these quiet, unsettling tales, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell. Thanks for listening. Just take care out there. I'll see you in the next one.